Welcome to the Africa Leadership Dialogues. Once again, it's great to have you with us. I'm Julie Gishuru. Now this week we delve into the youth factor on the African continent and we speak to Chinwe Effiong, who heads Junior Achievement in Africa. We also hear from you. And on Africa's Top 10 this week we feature the greatest strengths of the continent. It's very interesting. You certainly don't want to miss that. Now, some people have described the youth bulge in Africa as its greatest asset, but also its biggest challenge. With a growing population of young and vibrant people, all desperately seeking opportunities, how can Africa best appreciate, utilize, and reward this significant human resource base? Now, we spoke with young global leader Chinwe Effiong. She's also a motivational speaker, a writer as well, and she heads the Junior Achievement in Africa. She shared her views with us. Let's take a look. Chinwe, thank you so much for making time to be with us. Now, you're working with Junior Achievement, and everybody's talking about the youth bulge on Africa. To me, it is the greatest blessing of this continent, but it also is a threat if not managed properly, if they're not mentored and harnessed. So tell us about Junior Achievement. What are you doing with young people?
Just to put in perspective this youth bulge issue, in sub-Saharan Africa, the total population of the continent is 1 billion, and sub-Saharan Africa is about 800 million. And out of this 800 million, 62% are under the age of 24. That's about 500 million. And then 45 or so percent of that number is either out of school or unemployed. So you can imagine the magnitude of the issue. And these are young people who are currently 15, 24. In 10 years, they're going to be 25, 34. They're going to be the ones leading the nation. They're going to be the ones in the economic sector. They're going to be the parents and the teachers. And if we haven't instilled the right skills and the right values and the right capabilities, if they haven't been equipped to take on the leadership role, then the continent is in trouble. So as you said, it is a threat. It's a threat for potential crisis, but it's an enormous opportunity. Because if we could just focus, rather than the short-term emphasis on blowing out fires and crisis management, think a little bit more strategic about the future of the continent. And I mean, both you and I are mothers, and you know your children, you're thinking about their immediate needs, okay? They need clothes, they need food, they need shelter, but you're also thinking about their education. 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, what's their future like? What do I need to do now to invest in a stable future for them? So that's what Junior Achievement does. We're focusing on young people as the critical mass of leadership for the future. Research has shown that 95% of all learning occurs between birth and age 11. So you can imagine all of the bachelors and the masters and the PhDs, only 5% of learning. So if we miss them at that very young age, we've missed them. And I was looking at some of the statistics around the percent of GDP that goes to education. And in some countries, it looks very high. In the US, in North America and Canada, it's about 5 point something percent. In most of Africa, the average in Africa is about 5%, so that's not bad. In Burundi, it's actually as high as 8.3%. But if you go behind those numbers, the bulk of those funds are dedicated to tertiary education. And so that's why you see the young people coming out of primary school, coming out of secondary school, and still don't have the basic skills to get a job or to start some kind of enterprise. So Junior Achievement is 92 years old. We've been around since World War I, started in the US as an after-school program after the economic devastation of the war. It was a way to revive the economy by focusing on young people. It became very popular. And then started to become mainstreamed in the curriculum, K through 12 curriculum. Around 1955, the concept went international. So I think it started with JA Europe, And now we have JA in over 120 countries in 6 regions. JA Africa, the first country to start implementing programs in Africa was South Africa, and that was about 31 years ago. And now we're currently in 18 countries across every major region of the continent, and we're doing some exciting things. We have programs from primary, middle school, secondary, and now we're moving into out of school. You don't need a Harvard business degree. And with all due respect to people who have gotten an MBA, but in a situation of crisis, you have to be innovative. There's a sense of immediacy and urgency. So you don't really need to go to business school to start generating income.
Let's talk about young people generally. And you know, there's almost a feeling that opportunity hasn't been provided for them, but there's the other argument that opportunity does not present itself to you. You must seek and create your own opportunities. What would you say to that?
I would say, Julie, that we're all products of our upbringing. And a child, I mean, there's a whole argument about nurture and nature. You know, do you just naturally come with the skills and the talents and just make it? Or is there a necessary part of that nurturing that helps you? And I'll use myself as an example. I was born in Nigeria during a civil war. And at the age of 3, I left. In fact, my mother and older brother and I left on a relief plane, cargo plane from Lisbon, and eventually went to New York and became US citizens. And I had the benefit of a good education. But I've been back many times. I've gone to my village in Nigeria, and I've seen some of my cousins who share the same roots and origins with me, but because they did not have the exposure that I had, their life paths have gone in different directions. So, I mean, do they have the potential in them? Yes, I think they do. But that potential was never developed. And you look at our educational system, and some are better than others, but our educational system and even our culture does not train our young people to be critical thinkers, to be innovative, to be analytical, to be problem solvers. It's all rote. You know, we teach them, first of all, from home, we teach them to be quiet. Okay? When elders are speaking, you don't speak. I mean, that is shaping the psyche of our young people. And then they go to school, and they're being taught subjects, and they're being taught to pass exams. They're being taught, they're not being given the skills that they really need to survive.
They're cramming for exams rather than learning and gaining knowledge.
Exactly. That's the foundation that they have. So it's not surprising then that they graduate from secondary school or even from university, and they're looking for a job. They're not, it's the furthest thing from the average African youth to start something on their own. How? Why? Why should I do that when I can get a job in the ministry, or I can, you know, preferably an NGO or an international organization? So the concept is so foreign unless we really, and so what we're trying to do is re-socialize, not just the young people, but the educational system. And we work very closely with the Ministry of Education to help, you know, not just to replace what the ministry is doing, but to complement and to collaborate, and hopefully to get entrepreneurial thinking back into the curriculum.
Let's talk about your partnership with government. I'd be fascinated to know, how do government ministries receive you when you come in with these ideas of going into schools and, you know, implementing what you've described as really re-socialization programs? How is it working with governments?
I'll start by saying most of them are very welcoming. They give you audience, you have the meeting, wonderful ideas, the synergies are easily identified, but the problem is in the follow-up, in the follow-through. And so as soon as you leave, it's like back to business as usual. So the onus is on us to continue a sustained conversation with them, because they're busy, they have priorities that they've already set, and also the other responsibility we have is to make sure that what we're introducing fits into their plan and their priorities. So it's not like a parallel system. We have to make the connection very clear to them. And usually, once that's done, they run with it. And in several countries now, we have signed MOUs with the Ministry of Education allowing us to have our programs in all schools in that country.
Give us an example of a country where this is working very effectively. It could be a case study for the rest of Africa.
Honestly, I think there are several, but my first choice would be Botswana. The permanent secretary in Botswana is just unbelievable, dynamic. She gets it. She gets it. And just recently, I think it was last night, I got an email, them following up on something we talked about.
You couldn't believe it.
I was like, you know, exactly. They were asking our executive director there, what happened to this proposal that we're supposed to get? They want to sponsor the annual competition we're having next year in Botswana. So, I mean, this is a government that's really proactive. And they have signed an MOU with JA, open-ended. You can access all the schools. There's an parastatal called BOTA, the Botswanan Training Authority. I think that's correct. They endorse all curriculum for vocational education or in school. They have taken our staff through the process of accreditation to make sure that we are situated squarely into the system and can partner with anyone. So that is definitely a good practice, if not a best practice. Yeah.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Welcome back to the Africa Leadership Dialogues, now still on the way. Africa's top 10, and this week we're looking at the greatest strengths of the African continent. But first, let's get back to Chinwe Effiong, a passionate African woman working with the youth on the continent. Let's get her views on youth and development. When you look at Africa, we have obviously countries at different levels of democracy across the continent, but it seems like we are moving forward. What do you think are the three most important attributes for African leaders today?
I think the first has to be self-awareness. Self-awareness and self-respect, and I'll explain that. For centuries, if you want to go all the way back to colonialism, everything African was wrong. Okay, our systems of government were wrong, our language was wrong, our culture was wrong.
Or so we were told.
Oh, so we were told. And we've imbibed that on an individual level as well as on a corporate level. And so, you know, from the 60s, there was this whole movement, decolonization movement. And so we got independence. We got independence on paper. We have our own flag. We're now sovereign nations. But psychologically, we didn't have the independence. And thus came neocolonialism or imperialism, economic imperialism. And still that continues today because now we have China. And, you know, God bless China for helping us with technological development. But our leaders still don't get it. They still don't understand that we have to position ourselves, even as we're negotiating with China, to make sure that we're not creating a new kind of colonialism. What is in our interest in this relationship? And how do we make sure that that interest is protected? So I think that's what I mean by self-awareness and self-respect. And rather than self here defined corporately, not individually. I think that the next thing would be long-term vision. And we were talking about that a little earlier. And that is, you know, just as we as parents look at a longer-term approach, as a leader, you have a responsibility to your nation. You have a responsibility to meet their immediate needs, and you have a responsibility to make sure that the future of your nation is, well, at least within your power, on stable ground, making the proper investments in education, in diversifying the economy, and not just having a narrow short-term view. And I think the third would be inclusiveness. again, I love the analogy of a parent because maybe that's my greatest challenge, is I went to Swaziland. And that's another example, a great example. Met with the Prime Minister, and he had a press briefing. And afterwards, he said, let's go into my office. And very down to earth man. And he said, what else does JA think we can do? And they're very supportive of education and of our programs. And I said, one of the things I think would be wonderful for a country like yours to set an example is in inclusion of youth, the voice of youth. And throughout this conference, you'll hear that as a recurring theme. They need to know what is going on. They need to be part of decision making. And the assumption that young people don't know anything is false. And even if they don't know, this is their future that we're talking about. So I was on a panel in Ghana, and I was talking about how any responsible father or mother would make sure that his or her children understand what the family assets are, who the family friends are, and who the enemies, and what land belongs to the family, and what land is in dispute, and what are the issues. And if the father doesn't do that, what happens is when the father dies, the children start to fight. And that's because that inclusion wasn't there. The sense of let the people come, and even in traditional African societies, we had the village meetings where the chief would come out and talk with the elders, and the elders would communicate with the villagers, and even the women and the children, and they were all part of this process. I know there are some African societies that were more hierarchical, but I think the vast majority can identify with this. But somehow this has changed in modern society, and that inclusion is a big missing piece.
Okay, very interesting. So if we do have leaders who embrace those and other attributes, how do you see Africa's development and growth over the next 10 years? Paint a picture for Africa, the picture that you have of Africa 10 years from now.
It's an amazing picture. If you think of it, I think 7 out of the 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa. So already you can see the momentum building. It's a question of sustaining that momentum and making sure that growth turns into, a benefit for all. So I see an Africa where we cease to be recipients of aid, that we cease to clamor for the next donor assistance, that we become givers of aid. I see an Africa where we are partners in international trade, that the terms of trade are such that are equitable because we are at the table, we are part of the dialogue, we are part of setting the rules. I see an Africa where our resources, the full scope of our resources, not just the oil and the diamonds and the gold, but our material resources that are yet untapped, and our human resources are developed. I see an Africa where our young people are not lining up at the embassies in the hundreds to get visas. I see an Africa where people are lining up at our embassies to come here. I see an Africa where our young people are not ashamed to say, I'm Nigerian or I'm Kenyan. I'm sorry, this is very emotional for me. I was in Washington and I was working at an organization called Africare, and a young girl was introduced to me. She's Nigerian, her name was Nigerian. And so they said, come meet Chinwe and she could be your mentor, and she was looking for an internship. So as soon as I saw her, I'm like, oh, Chinwe, I think that was her name. You're Nigerian. She said, no, I'm not Nigerian. I said, oh, okay, your parents gave you a Nigerian name. She said, well, my parents are Nigerian, but I'm not Nigerian. So I said, okay, my dear, I need to just talk with you off the record. He said, you have no other heritage. I don't care what color your passport is. You need to be proud of your heritage. Even in America, you have Jewish Americans and Italian Americans and Chinese Americans.
Who embrace their cultures and their
exactly. So and that is a product of the way our nations have evolved. And of course, also the kind of education and media, negative images that have, but my children are as American as they get. They were born in America, but you ask them, where are you from? I'm Nigerian American. And I don't remember actually telling them to say that, but they have a pride in their culture, and that's I'll stop there.
That's very moving, and thanks for sharing that. What is the greatest challenge to getting there, do you think?
I think it's psychological, mindset. We just need a paradigm shift, and it's at multiple levels. We need, and all stakeholders need to be part of that paradigm shift. It needs to be from government, re-emphasizing, campaigning and redefining that sense of national identity and pride. It needs to be from faith-based organizations, and Africa is a very religious continent. Africans are religious people, whether they're Christian or Muslim. So the faith-based leaders have a significant role to play in helping to reshape that mentality. It needs to be parents. I think parents cannot be exonerated because those formative years, the most of those formative years are at home, from birth to 5. What kind of values are we instilling in our children? So that paradigm shift needs to be done across. So I think that's the greatest challenge. I think another challenge is just finding the right leaders who really can see beyond their noses and beyond their immediate gratification. How much wealth can you really accumulate for yourself? And think beyond your immediate financial stability. And the whole nation, you have been given a responsibility, and you have an opportunity to leave a legacy that will live far beyond the mansions and the nice cars. What are you doing with that legacy? Visionary leaders. I think that's very critical. And I think education is really important. But I think all of that flows into the paradigm shift, for people to really understand what is at stake here, and that's the future.
With Africans watching, your thoughts, what message do you have for them?
I think the best way to share that message is to share my own heart, and that is, I am so grateful to be an African. I'm an American citizen, but I'm an African. I see it as a thing of pride, but also as a responsibility. And I just want to encourage you to see your stay on this earth as a responsibility, as an assignment, and ask yourself at the end of every day, at the end of every year, when you do your New Year resolutions, what have I done to further the cause of this beautiful continent? And I speak not only to people of African descent, because there are many people, Europeans, Americans, Asians, all over the world, who have a passion for Africa. In fact, in many instances, a passion greater than Africans themselves, who want to help, who want to do the right thing. And I just want to encourage you that in spite of the obstacles, in spite of the contradictions and conflicts, keep at it, because you're leaving a legacy that will live far beyond you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. See it as an assignment, and at the end of every day, ask yourself, what have I achieved today for the continent and, of course, for yourself? Ultimately, it's an investment in each and every one of us. Chinwe, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues. To take part in our weekly hangouts, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues. On Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues. On Twitter, @AfricaLD.
And now, Africa's top 10. This week we look at the greatest strengths of the African continent. What are they?
At number 10 is the wind of change, once again sweeping across the continent and changing the African narrative from the dark continent of doom and gloom to the resource-rich land of opportunity. At number 9 is education. Africa is registering improved levels of education which help catalyze development across the continent. At number 8 is the significant growth potential best illustrated by the mobile revolution on the African continent. Number 7 is the strategic positioning of the continent, which sees Africa straddle time zones across Asia, Europe, and the United States of America. Number 6 is the proximity and close links to the large European Union market. At number 5, we have the large tourism market with diverse offerings of beach and safari, forest and city, desert and mountain holidays, as well as ecotourism and much more. Number 4 is the significantly large emerging consumer market on the African continent. And standing at number 3 is the highly competitive cost base. Number 2 is the large labor force. This offers a significant human resource base. And at number 1, we have the highly sought after natural resources on the African continent. And there you have Africa's top 10 strengths.
Depending on how we manage our human resource base, numbers 1 and 2 on Africa's top 10 could shift places. What do you think though? This is how you can join the conversation.
Oboge Magara Jr. says, "This is an exciting time to be a young African man or woman preparing for life and career ahead. This is a time for change for our continent. The past 20 years have seen a remarkable growth in the African middle class. Access to technology is helping bridge previously stubborn barriers to education, financial services, and info. Now is the time for Africans to take charge of our destinies and show the world what we are capable of."
Well, that's it from us this week. As always, it's a great pleasure to be with you. And we leave you with some very powerful words from Rwanda's President Paul Kagame this week. He said, "We cannot turn the clock back, nor can we undo the harm caused, but we have the power to determine the future and to ensure that what happened never happens again." Of course, he was speaking of the Rwanda genocide, but this could easily apply to anybody on the African continent. So remember, you have the power to determine your future and the future of the African continent. What are you going to do with that power? Blessings to you and blessings to Africa as well. I'm Julie Gishuru and I look forward to being with you again next week.